My name is Celeste Hargrove. I'm 34 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a third-floor apartment on East 10th Street with a view of the uptown skyline and a kitchen that smells like the Ethiopian coffee I grind every single morning at 6 a.m. I have a parking spot in a garage that costs me $210 a month. I have a Vitamix blender I bought with my own money. I have a job title that takes about 45 seconds to say out loud in full. And on a Tuesday morning in February the 14th, because of course it was Valentine's Day, I got a phone call to spend the rest of life trying to make sense of. Dr. Reginald Cobb, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Atrium Health's Carolinas Medical Center on Blythe Boulevard, called me at 6:48 in the morning. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee. Marcus was still asleep in the bedroom. I saw Reggie Cobb's cell number and answered on the second ring, because you always answer on the second ring when Dr. Cobb calls before 7 a.m. Cest, he said, we have a situation. Patient came in by ambulance 40 minutes ago. 60-year-old female, anterior STEMI, significant stenosis in the left anterior descending artery and the right coronary artery. She's stable enough to hold, but she needs a bypass in the next several hours. I need you an OR 4x9. I asked why, specifically me and not doctor. Whitfield, who was technically on rotation that morning. There was a pause. Her family is requesting you by name. I set my coffee cup down on the kitchen counter. The handle clinked against the granite. What's the patient's name? I asked. Dr. Cobb said a name I had heard every single day for the first 18 years of my life. A name that had called me dramatic, difficult, expensive, and on at least 4 separate occasions I can still recall with perfect clarity, word for word, a burden. The patient's name was Diane Hargrove, my mother. Before I tell you what happened next, and there is so much more to tell, I need you to do something for me. Drop your location and your local time in the comments right now. What city, what country, what time is it where you are? I want to know who's out there listening to this. It makes it easier to keep going when I know you're there. And please, like and subscribe, but only if what I'm saying lands somewhere real inside you. I am not here for numbers. I am here for the people who recognize this story. So, my mother. You cannot understand that February morning without understanding the 34 years that came before it. I'll try to give you the shape of it without losing you in the details, though the details are the whole point. The details are what separate a story from a feeling. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, the North Side, in a neighborhood called Northbrook Estates, which sounds more impressive than it was. 4-bedroom colonial on Windmill Ridge Road, beige siding with black shutters, a crepe myrtle in the front yard that bloomed pink every June and dropped its petals across the driveway in a way my mother found beautiful until it was her turn to sweep them up. My father, Raymond Hargrove, was a senior adjuster at Allied Insurance Group on Capitol Boulevard. He drove the same route every morning, wore 4 ties in rotation, and watched Carolina Panthers games the way certain men attend church, with reverence and a prepared willingness to be disappointed. He communicated primarily through the phrases, "We'll see," "Your mother handles that," and "Don't make a scene." He was not a cruel man. He was an absent one even when he was physically present. I have come to understand, in the years I've spent in twice-monthly therapy with Dr. Sandra Kim, that this is its own particular variety of wound. My mother, Diane Hargrove, was a residential real estate agent with Coldwell Banker HPW. She sold 4 or 5 houses a year, attended every school board meeting in the district, and refreshed her blonde highlights every 6 weeks at a salon called Illusions on Falls of Noose Road. She was organized and sociable. She was the woman who always arrived at a neighbor's door with a casserole after surgery, who sent handwritten birthday cards to her clients every year without exception, who laughed the loudest at parties and could make a complete stranger feel welcome within 30 seconds of meeting her. She was, by every external measure, a genuinely warm woman. She just didn't particularly warm to me. I know how that sounds. Let me be precise, because imprecision is the thing I hate most. My sister Whitney was 2 years older, 36 now, still in Raleigh, still selling residential real estate part-time while her husband Brandon manages their investments. Whitney was the easy child in the specific way some children simply align with the vision their parents carried before they arrived. Sociable and pretty and cheerful, the kind of daughter who made my mother's shoulders drop from their habitual tension just by walking into a room. Whitney was a cheerleader at Broughton High School. She was homecoming court junior year. She had a group of friends who commandeered our living room every Friday afternoon. And my mother moved through those gatherings like a woman in her native environment, refilling the snack bowls, finishing their sentences fully and visibly alive in a way I only saw in those afternoons. I was the other one. I was the one who needed glasses at age 7. The frames and lenses cost $340, and I know this precisely because my mother mentioned it twice at Easter that year in front of my Aunt Renee. I was the one whose mild asthma required a prescription inhaler. $48 a month with the Walmart pharmacy discount card, which my father referenced once when explaining why Disney World wasn't in the budget when I was 9. I was the one whose math scores flagged in 6th grade until my 7th grade teacher, Mrs. Annette Burrows, figured out I wasn't slow. I was bored by the way the equations were being presented, and when she switched to spatial and visual problem solving, I went from a C- to the top of the class in 11 weeks. My mother was not at the parent-teacher conference where Mrs. Burrows shared this. She was at Whitney's dance recital at a hotel ballroom in Cary. I want to be careful here, because the truth of it is complicated in the way that most true things are. My parents kept the lights on and the heat running. There was always food in the refrigerator on Windmill Ridge Road. I was not struck. I was not screamed at. I was something that is harder to name and harder to explain to someone who hasn't lived inside it. I was treated like a line item on a budget that kept going over. I want to pause here for just a second, because I know that some of you are reading between these lines right now. If you grew up being made to feel like your needs were an inconvenience, like your glasses or your inhaler or your tutoring sessions were things you owed someone an apology for, I want you to type the word seen in the comments. Just that one word. Because you deserve to hear it said out loud. The clearest example I can give you is from the spring of my sophomore year at Broughton High School. I entered the North Carolina Regional Science and Engineering Fair with a project on fluid dynamics and arterial blood flow. I was 15 years old. I had spent 4 months building it, staying late on Tuesdays in the biology lab with my teacher, Mr. Harrison, who had recognized something in me that nobody at home was looking for, and had quietly donated his Tuesday afternoons to help me refine it. I placed first in my division. I won a fun $500 scholarship from the North Carolina Biotech Center and an invitation to compete at the state level. The award ceremony was held on a Saturday at North Carolina State University's Hunt Library. My name was called over a microphone in a room full of strangers. I walked to a podium. I shook hands with the dean of NC State's College of Engineering. My parents were not there. Whitney had a cheerleading showcase at a hotel in Cary. My mother had told me 4 days before the science fair, "Honey, we can't be in 2 places at once." A short pause. Whitney's been working on her routine since September. I drove myself to NC State in our 2003 Honda Accord, which I'd gotten my license 6 weeks earlier specifically to be able to do things like this alone. I shook the dean's hand. I took a photograph with Mr. Harrison. I drove home and put the certificate and the first place ribbon in the top drawer of my desk, under a stack of National Geographic magazines I'd been collecting since 5th grade. There, where no one would ask about them. That night, my mother made chicken piccata, Whitney's favorite, to celebrate the showcase. I ate 2 full servings and did not say a single word. I decided, somewhere between first and Susanset's serving of chicken piccata, that I was going to become a doctor. I want to be honest about the motivation, because it matters. I did not decide to become a doctor out of spite. Spite is loud and reactive, and what I felt sitting at that table was neither. I decided to become a doctor because I had stood at that podium at NC State's Hunt Library and felt, for the first time in my memory, like the most valuable thing about me was my brain. The project had been about arterial blood flow, and the more I had learned about how a heart works, the four chambers, the valves, the electrical architecture, the impossibly precise choreography that keeps a person alive without their having to think about it, the more I understood that I could spend my entire life in that subject and never reach the bottom of it. I wanted to be in that room. I wanted to be the person someone called when the engine failed. I also understood in the Honda Accord on the way home that I was going to have to get there entirely alone. Senior year, I applied to Duke University's pre-med program. I had a 4.2 GPA, a 1480 on the ST, a letter of recommendation from Mr. Harrison, and the first place ribbon from the NC Regional Science Fair. Duke accepted me in December with a partial scholarship, $14,200 per year. The Meningshosnlas $18,400 annually, or $73,600 as over 4 years. I sat my parents down at the kitchen table on a Sunday in January, the same table where my father signed every permission slip. The same table where my mother had spread Whitney's college brochures 2 years earlier with the energy of someone planning a vacation she had been dreaming about. I put the Duke acceptance letter and the cost breakdown on the table in front of them. I told them I'd already researched work study and federal loans. I told them that with their help closing the gap, I could do this without it crushing me. My father looked at the paper. He looked at my mother. He looked back at the paper. Whitney's wedding is in May, my mother said. I stared at her. We've already committed to the venue. The ceremony and reception room at the Umstead Hotel in Cary. The rental alone is $22,000 before catering. We've had this booked for 2 years. I know about the wedding, I said, but the wedding is Whitney's. This is my education. Celeste. My father's voice carried that particular patience that meant the decision had already been made somewhere above my pay grade. We're stretched thin right now. The wedding has been in the budget since the engagement. Your sister needs us. I got into Duke, I said. Not loudly. Carefully. The way you say something you need to stay in the room. Pre-med. With a partial scholarship. My mother looked at me the way she looked at a house that needed more work than the listing price justified. Reasonable, considered, not unkind. Duke isn't the only option, honey. NC State is an excellent school. It's in-state tuition, and it wouldn't put us in a difficult position right now. I was 17 years old, sitting at a table I had eaten at my entire life, with $43 in my savings account, and my mother had just told me that my admission to Duke University's pre-med program was a difficult position. I took out the maximum federal loans I qualified for. I applied for every supplemental scholarship I could locate through the NC Biotech Center, the Durham Community Foundation, Duke's own financial aid office. I worked 22 hours a week at a Starbucks on East Main Street in Durham for all 4 years. I graduated from Duke with a 391 GPA, $74,200 in student debt, and a letter of acceptance from the University of North Carolina School of Medicine in Chapel Hill. My parents drove up for graduation. My mother cried in the parking lot behind Duke Chapel. She hugged me and said she was proud, and I held on to that hug longer than I should have, because some part of me, the part that still kept a seat at the table for the mother she might someday choose to be, needed it to mean something real. Whitney and her husband Brandon drove up too. Brandon shook my hand and said, "So you're really going to be a doctor, huh?" Like it was a personality quirk rather than a career he'd watched me build from $43 and a scholarship ribbon. "Yes," I said. "Good money in that," he said. Like money was the only reason a person would do it. Like the only thing worth understanding about a life's work was the salary at the end of it. I smiled. I didn't say anything. I was learning, even then, how to hold my peace about things that didn't deserve my words. I have to ask you this while I still have the nerve. Did anyone ever respond to the thing you were most proud of, the hardest thing you'd ever built, and reduce it to a transaction? A number, a cost-benefit analysis, a practicality? Tell me in the comments. What was the dream and what did they say? I want to know. I read every single one. Medical school at UNC Chapel Hill was the hardest thing I have ever done. And I say that as someone who later spent 5 years in surgical residency on 4 hours of sleep and a $314 monthly personal budget. I moved into a studio apartment in Chapel Hill in August. 708 a month paid with a combination of remaining loan funds, a small grant from the UNC Medical Foundation, and 4 years of pre-dawn Starbucks savings. The apartment had one window that faced a parking lot and a radiator that clanked through the night with the determination of something trying to escape. I loved that apartment with a ferocity I still don't fully understand. It was mine. Every square foot of it had been earned. I called home once a month, roughly. My mother would ask how things were going. I would tell her the cadaver lab on the first day of anatomy, the 4 a.m. Study sessions in Davis Library, the week we spent on the cardiac conduction system, which I consumed like it was oxygen, and she would make sounds in the way that meant she was half present, and eventually the conversation would pivot to Whitney. By then, Whitney had married Brandon Kelsey in a ceremony at the Umstead Hotel, the same venue booked with the money that could have closed my gap at Duke. They had purchased a house in North Raleigh's Wakefield subdivision, 4 bedrooms, $387,000, toward which my parents had contributed a $40,000 down payment gift. Whitney was expecting her first baby. My mother was driving to Raleigh every other weekend to help paint the nursery a color called Whispering Peach. I did not resent the baby. Harper was innocent. What I felt, what I documented with the precision of someone who had learned early to catalog her own experience, because no one else was not resentment toward a child. It was grief for a version of my mother I was now fairly certain did not exist, the one who would have driven 90 miles every other weekend for me. Junior year of medical school, I was selected for a 2-week surgical training fellowship at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. 12 students from programs across the country, fully funded, competitive. I called home to tell the third ring. Ansville, he said. Yes, how far is that? About 7 hours from Raleigh. A pause. Your mother's at Whitney's baby shower. I'll let her know. She texted me that evening. That's great, honey. Busy weekend here. Talk soon. Blue heart emoji. I went to Nashville alone. I spent 2 weeks in operating rooms at Vanderbilt, watching surgeons work on the human heart with a focus and a tenderness I didn't expect, like people handling something they understood was both powerful and fragile, both mechanical and alive, in a way that transcended the mechanical. I came back to Chapel Hill knowing, with a certainty I had never felt about anything, that cardiothoracic surgery was what I was going to do with my one life. I told my mother on the phone a few weeks later. Oh, that's the heart and lungs, she said. Yes. Doesn't that take forever to train for? 7 years post-medical school. Residency and then a 2-year fellowship. A silence I could feel her filling with arithmetic. Celeste, you'll be almost 32 by the time you're done. 29 when I finish, actually. But yes, it's a long road. We just worry about you, she said. And then, in a voice that was soft and almost gentle, and almost maternal in the way it aimed to be, you've always made everything so hard on yourself. I've turned that sentence over many times in the years since. She meant it as concern. I know she did. But underneath the softness was the thing she had been saying my entire life without quite using those specific words. You are too much. You cost more than you're worth. You take up space that other people need more than you do. I finished medical school. I matched into a cardiothoracic surgery residency at Atrium Health's Carolinas Medical Center in Charlotte. One of 12 programs nationally, one of 2 where I'd been accepted. It was my first choice. I called home to tell them. My mother said she was proud of me and asked if Charlotte was safe at night. I moved with 2 suitcases, a box of textbooks, and $347 in my checking account after my security deposit cleared. I was 26 years old. I did not ask my parents for $1. Residency was 5 years I would not trade and would not willingly relive. I worked 80-hour weeks at Carolinas Medical Center. I slept in call rooms that smelled like institutional soap and recycled air. I ate cafeteria food at 2 in the morning and stood in operating rooms for 12-hour stretches and learned, in the most granular possible way, how a human heart fails and precisely how to stop it. From doing so, my resident salary was $52,000 a year. My loan payment was $147 a month. After rent, utilities, and groceries, I had $314 left, and I became extraordinarily good at making it last 30 days. I ate a lot of soup from a can. I bought coffee at the hospital cafeteria instead of Starbucks. I didn't resent any of it, which is something I can say with complete honesty. I was exactly where I had aimed to be. My supervising resident in my second year was Dr. Priya Nair. She was 3 years ahead of me. Tamil American, from Irvine, California, with a memory for cardiac anatomy I have genuinely never seen matched, and a laugh that could fill a conference room and make you feel, even at 2 in the morning after a 14-hour shift, like you were somewhere worth being. She took me to get ramen at a place called Queen City Q on the Wednesday night after my first solo assist on a coronary bypass. And she said, over a bowl of broth that was the best thing I had eaten. In at least 2 weeks, you know you're going to be excellent. Not good, excellent. I'm telling you now, so you have the information. What you do with it is your business. It was the first time in my memory that someone had said something like that to me without a condition buried inside it. I cried in my car on the way back to my apartment, not sad tears, the other kind, the ones that come when something you needed to hear finally reaches you, years after you needed it. My attending, Dr. Franklin Osei, was 51, Ghanaian American, trained at Johns Hopkins and widely regarded as one of the 3 best cardiothoracic surgeons in the Southeast. He was demanding and precise and occasionally terrifying in that way. Only genuinely excellent people can be, and he mentored me in a way I now understand was not given freely to everyone. He decided to, and when he decided it, he committed fully. He pushed me harder than anyone else in the program. He also sat with me, once, in his office after a 41-year-old woman didn't make it off the table. A woman who had 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9, which I knew because I had read her chart so many times it had become a kind of private vigil, and said, "You did everything right. Sometimes the heart has already made its decision before we get there." He said it looking directly at me. Like my grief was legitimate. Like it mattered that I heard it. I have thought about that moment many more times than he will ever know. What it means to be seen by someone with authority over you. To have your effort and your grief acknowledged without conditions attached. It is a small thing. It is also, as it turns out, everything. I met Marcus Webb at a Trader Joe's on South Boulevard in my 3rd year of residency. He was standing in front of the frozen meals, looking genuinely troubled about the tikka masala, and I said out loud, without entirely meaning to, because I was running on 4 hours of sleep, "The sag. Paneer is better." He looked at me. He had warm, dark eyes and flour on his jacket sleeve from a Saturday meeting of baking sourdough bread, which is perhaps the most Charlotte thing I have ever witnessed. He was 31, a physical therapist at Novant Health on Randolph Road, specializing in post-cardiac rehabilitation, which, standing in a freezer aisle at Trader Joe's with flour on his jacket, felt less like coincidence and more like the universe making a specific point. We talked for 40 minutes in the frozen food section. He bought the sag paneer. I gave him my number. He texted me at 10:17 that night. "You were right. It was better." 2 weeks later, dinner at a Thai restaurant on East Boulevard. 3 hours that felt like 45 minutes. On the drive home, I thought about how easy it had been, how easy he was to be near, how I had not once, in 3 hours, felt like I was taking up more space than I'd been allocated. I called home to tell my mother I was seeing someone. She asked if he was a doctor. I said he was a physical therapist. She said, "Oh," in a tone I could have mapped from memory alone. "Whitney and Brandon are thinking about a second baby," she said then, without a breath between my news and hers. "Harper is almost 2. Isn't that exciting? Has that ever happened to you? You share something real, something that matters to you, something you are actually glad about, And before you finish the sentence, it's redirected. You're still technically in the conversation, but you've already been left behind. Tell me in the comments how long it took you to stop trying to make them listen. I genuinely want to know. The years between residency and that February morning are the years I am most proud of. Not only because of what I accomplished, but because they are the years I built something that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. A real life, a full one. I completed my cardiothoracic fellowship at Carolina's Medical Center at 31. OC wrote a letter of recommendation for me that his administrative assistant mentioned, with wide eyes, was 3 pages, single-spaced. He averages 3 paragraphs, she said, like I should understand the magnitude of that. I did. I was offered a staff position at Atrium Health. I took it. My starting salary was $285,000 a year. I say the number specifically because it is the number that allowed me to refinance my student loans, pay off the full $74,200 in 18 months, and buy a used Subaru Outback in cash without asking a single person for anything. I called home the day I made my last loan payment. November, a Thursday late afternoon. My mother answered. "Mom," I said, "I just finished paying off my student loans." The full amount, $74,200. Done. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said, a brief pause in which I could feel her refilling. "Are you coming home for Thanksgiving?" "Whitney's doing a thing." I went home for Thanksgiving. I sat at the dining room table on Windmill Ridge Road. The crepe myrtle bare now, November stripped, its pink petals long gone. And I listened to Brandon walk through his investment portfolio in some detail, and Whitney described their kitchen renovation, $64,000 total. Quartz countertops. A refrigerator that produced artisan ice cubes in 3 distinct shapes. And my father watched Panthers lose to the Saints the way he always had, and my mother served the plates in the same order she always had. Raymond first, then Whitney, then Brandon, then Harper, who was 4 years old and the uncontested center of gravity at that table, and then me. I drove back to Charlotte that evening. Marcus met me at the door of my apartment with a glass of wine already poured. He looked at my face and said, "How bad medium?" I said. "Baking show? Please." We watched 4 episodes of the Great British Bake Off with our legs intertwined on the couch, and I thought, not sadly, not with any remaining bitterness, just with a clear and quiet certainty that this was it. This was the life I had built, and it was full. Priya called every Sunday from Durham, where she was now an attending at Duke University Hospital, and we talked for an hour about cardiology and bad television and the ongoing challenges of her love, life, and nothing about our families of origin. OC sent me texts when he saw papers in the New England Journal of Medicine he thought I'd find interesting, which I always did, and he had become something between a mentor and a father figure. Kind of man who remembered without being told that I take my coffee black and that I find case conferences more energizing than exhausting. Marcus's mother, Patricia Webb, in Greensboro made macaroni and cheese at Sunday dinners that I would list, without hesitation, as one of the top 5 experiences of my adult life, and she had folded me into their family so naturally and so completely that I had sometimes, driving home through the dark on I-85, felt the specific kind of gratitude that doesn't have a clean word attached to it. I did not need Windmill Ridge Road to be a complete person. I had learned this so thoroughly and so long ago that I barely thought about it anymore. And then Dr. Cobb called at 6:48 on a Tuesday morning in February. I stood at my kitchen counter for a long time after that call ended. Diane Hargrove, 60 years old, had been brought in by ambulance at 6:14 a.m. after my father found her unresponsive on the kitchen floor. The paramedics had stabilized her in transit. The ER team at Carolina's Medical Center confirmed an anterior STEMI, a massive heart attack affecting the front wall of the left ventricle, with critical blockages in 2 major coronary arteries. The cardiologist on call assessed her and determined that medication alone would not hold. She needed a coronary artery bypass graft, open heart surgery. Without it, within a matter of hours, her heart would give out. And my father, standing in the waiting room at 6:30 in the morning, had asked a triage nurse, by name specifically, with the certainty of a man who had made this decision somewhere in the back of an ambulance and was not going to be redirected, if Dr. Hargrove was on staff. The nurse said yes. My father said, "That's my daughter." And then he said, "She's the best one here, isn't she?" Not as a question, as a statement. As a fact he had already known the answer to and was simply making official. I found that out later. In the moment, all I had was Reggie Cobb's voice on the phone and my coffee cup against the granite and the February dark outside the kitchen window. I stood at that counter and I thought about a Saturday at NC State's Hunt Library when I was 15 years old. I thought about chicken piccata. I thought about a kitchen table in January and $40,000 given toward a house in Wakefield and a blue heart emoji sent instead of a phone call. I thought about the word hard. You've always made everything so hard on yourself, and what it means to have someone witness your entire life's effort and call it a personality flaw. And then I thought about a heart on a CT scan that was working as hard as it could against blockages that were slowly, quietly trying to kill it. I put the phone down. I went to the bedroom. I got dressed. I need you to answer this honestly. If you were standing where I was standing, if the person who spent your entire childhood making you feel like a burden was on a table that only you could save them from, what would you actually do? Not the right answer, not what you should do. What would you actually honestly do? Put it in the comments. Because I've asked myself a version of this question my entire life. And when the real moment came, my answer surprised me. Marcus was awake when I came back to the bedroom. He stood in the doorway watching me pull on my clothes and said, "Who called?" "Dr. Cobb." At 6 in the morning, patient in OR 4, he waited. "It's my mother." He was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the room and put his hands on either side of my face and looked at me without speaking. Then he kissed my forehead. "I know you," he said. "You're going to be exactly who you need to be in there." "I know," I said. "I know you know." Since I'm saying it out loud anyway. I drove to Carolina's medical center in the February dark. The uptown skyline was lit against a sky that was the particular shade of deep blue that only exists in the hour before sunrise, still and cold and not quite night yet. I parked in the physician's garage and walked through the staff entrance and took the elevator to 4 and pushed through the surgical suite doors. Dr. Cobb met me in the hallway outside OR 4 and handed me the imaging file without preamble. I stood in that hallway and looked at my mother's heart on a CT scan. The blockages were clear and significant. The left anterior descending artery nearly 70% occluded, the right coronary artery not far behind. The imaging showed evidence of the heart, compensating for weeks before this morning, maybe longer, tissue under stains and escalating stress. A body working desperately against something that had been building quietly for a long time. I thought, I know what that is. I put the file under my arm. I pushed through the OR doors. What happened in OR 4 that morning was not dramatic in the way you might expect. It was surgery. 8 hours of exactly what I had trained for. What doctor? Ozzy had spent 5 years teaching me what $47,000 per year in tuition had purchased, layered on top of every Tuesday afternoon in Mr. Harrison's biology lab and every pre-dawn Starbucks shift in Durham and every 2 a.m. bowl of cafeteria soup in a call room on Blythe Boulevard. I made the incision. I harvested the grafts. I bypassed 3 blockages. I did everything the science demanded, with the precision the science demanded, and nothing more and nothing less. When it was over, I stood in the scrub room with water running over my hands. Danielle, the scrub tech who had worked with me for 2 years and knew when to talk and when not to, said quietly, "Good outcome, Dr. Hargrove." "Very good," I said. "Thank you, Danielle." I dried my hands and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. My father was alone in the family waiting room by the window. He looked old in a way I hadn't noticed before, not frail but settled. Like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally, in this beige chair by this window, set it down and wasn't sure yet what his arms were for. He stood when I walked in. Before I could deliver the clinical summary I had rehearsed in the elevator, she survived. Successful revascularization, 3 vessels bypassed, ICU for 48 hours, expected recovery timeline. 4 to 6 weeks. He crossed the room and put his arms around me. He held on. She's going to be okay, I said into his shoulder. My voice was careful, level. The surgery went well. The blockages are cleared, 3 vessels bypassed. We'll keep her in the ICU and Celeste. His voice was rough. Just give me a minute, so I gave him a minute. We stood in that waiting room, my father's arms around me, and I let him hold on. I didn't cry, I wasn't sure I would cry. Not yet, not there. But I held on too, because he was my father, and his hands on my back were the hands of a man who had failed me in 100 quiet ways I could still enumerate, and also the hands of the man who had stood in an emergency room at 6:30 in the morning and asked for my name without hesitation, without qualification, not as a last resort, as a first instinct. Whitney arrived 3 hours later with Brandon behind her and Harper in a car seat. She came through the doors and stopped when she saw me and said, "Oh, thank God," and then started crying, and then said in one breath, "Is she okay? Tell me she's okay." "She's stable," I said. The surgery went well. Whitney looked at me for a long moment. Her mascara was tracked down her face. Her hair was loose. She was wearing yoga pants she had clearly grabbed in the dark and not thought twice about, which was its own kind of honesty. She looked nothing like the homecoming court photograph on my mother's dresser. She looked like a woman who had driven 93 miles from Raleigh before sunrise, because her mother might be dying. "You did the surgery," she said. "Yes. I didn't know," she said. "I knew you were a surgeon. I knew that, but I didn't know you were the one they would call. I didn't know it would be you." Her voice broke across the last word. "I'm so glad it was you." There was a great deal packed into those words. I could have spread them out on the table and examined each one. The admission that she hadn't known what I specifically did. The relief that was also, underneath it, a reckoning with everything she hadn't paid attention to. I could have said, "Look at this. Look at what it means that you're glad now." I've had enough therapy to know I could have said all of that. I've also had enough therapy to know when something doesn't need to be said, because the moment is already saying it. "She's going to need consistent support during recovery," I said instead. 6 to 12 weeks minimum. I've recused myself from her ongoing care. I've referred her to Dr. Amara Patterson at Sanger Heart, who is excellent. "But your mom is going to need the family present and reliable." Whitney nodded. "We'll be there." A pause. "Will you?" "As much as I can," I said. "Yes, my mother came out of the ICU on day 3. By day 4, she was in a cardiac recovery room on the 6th floor, pale and smaller, against the white hospital pillows than I had ever seen her. My mother, who had always filled whatever room she occupied, who had always been the one in motion, now very still. IV line in her left arm. Cardiac monitor marking time beside her. I went to see her that afternoon. I was still in my white coat. I told myself it was because I was technically on duty. I think it was also because the coat was a kind of armor, and I was not yet certain I wouldn't need it. She was awake. She looked at me when I walked in, and something moved across her face, complicated, layered, the kind of expression I had been cataloging since I was old enough to understand that her face was a map I needed to be able to read to navigate my own childhood safely. "Hey, Mom," I said. "Hey, baby," she said. Her voice was rough from the intubation tube. She looked at me for a long moment. "You did the surgery." "I did. Your father told me. Said you were in there for 8 hours. About that, yes." The monitor beeped. Down the hall, someone laughed at something on a television. The February light came through the window at a low, flat angle, pale and specific, and cold. "I'm going to need physical therapy," she said. "Cardiac rehabilitation. At least 6 weeks, more likely 12. I'll refer you to the program at Sanger Heart and Vascular Institute. They're the best in the state." She looked at me. "Will you? As your surgeon, I'll follow your progress at a distance. For your ongoing cardiac care, Dr. Patterson will take over completely. She's excellent. You'll like her." "That's not what I meant." She stopped. Her hands moved slightly on the blanket, a small, unconscious motion. "Celeste," I waited. I know I didn't. She stopped again. My mother, who had always had the right words for everyone else, who had navigated every social situation in Raleigh with effortless fluency, was stuck. I didn't understand what you were doing. Not just the surgery, all of it. I thought I understood it, and I didn't. She looked toward the window. Your father asked for you in the ER. I was in and out. I remember pieces of it, but I remember him asking for you, by name. Like there was no question anywhere in him. I know, I said. He was so certain, she said. He wasn't hoping you'd be available. He wasn't wondering. He just asked for you. A pause. Like he'd always known. I thought about my father and his rotation of 4 ties, communicating primarily through we'll see. I thought about how little I had ever expected from him, and about the fact that the measure of a person is not always visible in the ordinary days, but sometimes emerges entirely in the moment when everything becomes real. He loves you very much, I said. You both do. I've always known that was true. That's not the same as no, I said. It's not, but I know it's true. She looked back at me. Her eyes were full. My mother, who had cried at Whitney's homecoming, and at the wedding, and at the births of both her grandchildren, was looking at me in a hospital room I had put her in by becoming the person I became, with tears running quietly down her face. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words, not a reckoning, not an accounting of 34 years. Not the science fair at NC State, not the chicken piccata, not the blue heart emoji, not the $40,000 for a down payment on a house in Wakefield while I was eating canned soup in a call room. Not all of it. Just 2 words from a woman who had never found those 2 words before, in my direction, in my entire life. I held them carefully. I turned them over. I set them down like something fragile. I know, I said. Rest, Mom. I'll check in tomorrow. I walked down the hall to the elevator and pressed 4 and stood in that small metal box as it rose. And I did not cry yet, and I thought about every moment in my life where I had wanted something from her that she didn't know how to give, and about the fact that a hospital, on a February morning in Charlotte, had called her by my name. The doors opened. I walked back to the surgical suite. There was a 2 o'clock case. I scrubbed in. That was 14 months ago. My mother completed her cardiac rehabilitation at Sangner Heart and Vascular Institute. 12 weeks, which I had estimated correctly. Dr. Patterson told me recently when I ran into her at a department meeting that Diane is doing remarkably well for someone who survived an interior STEMI at 60. She said it like it was an accomplishment. It isn't. I helped make it possible, and I have allowed myself, quietly, without making a production of it, to feel something real about that. My parents still live on Windmill Ridge Road. My father retired from Allied Insurance Group last spring and calls me on Tuesday evenings with a reliability I find both amusing and genuinely moving. He asks about my cases in the way someone asks about a subject they don't fully understand, but have decided, late in the game, to finally learn. He called me a few months ago and asked if I would explain what a coronary bypass actually involves, what I physically do, in real terms. I told him. He was quiet for a long moment and then said, Jesus Celeste, not critically. Like a man finally grasping the weight of something he'd been holding for years without ever once looking at it directly. My mother calls on Sundays. Not every Sunday, some Sundays, which is new and real and more than she ever managed before. She asks about Marcus by name every time, with a specificity and a consistency that I find both funny and quietly moving. She told me last month that she'd mentioned to her friend Karen, at Illusions, that her daughter was a heart surgeon, and Karen had asked which kind, and my mother had said, I think the important... I laughed for longer than the joke warranted. It was hers, it was genuine, I kept it. Whitney and I have coffee sometimes when she's in Charlotte. Not often, because Raleigh and Charlotte are 90 miles apart and our lives don't overlap much, but sometimes. She brought Harper in March, and Harper, who is 5 now and constitutionally fearless, looked at my white coat hanging on the back of my office door and said, Have you ever seen a real heart? I said yes. She said like a Valentine heart or a real heart. I said both. She said cool in the voice of someone who has just discovered something worth keeping forever. I thought, Yes, exactly. Marcus proposed at Trader Joe's. He drove to the same South Boulevard location, stood in the same freezer aisle, and handed me a bag of paneer with a ring inside it and said, "I was right the first time. You were worth following." I said yes, or finish the sentence. We close on our house next month. 4 blocks from my apartment on East 7th Street, east-facing kitchen. It will smell like Ethiopian coffee in the mornings and Marcus's sourdough on the weekends. And it is the most thoroughly mine thing I have ever owned, because it is mine and his both, and I chose him. And he chose me, and no one gave us a single dollar toward it. I am sitting at my desk in my office at Carolina's Medical Center on a Thursday evening in April. The window faces west. The late light is doing what it always does in April in Charlotte. Gold and low, catching the edges of buildings in a way that makes the city look like it is briefly on fire. There is a framed photo of me and Marcus at his family's Thanksgiving in Greensboro, his mother Patricia pointing at the mirror and laughing from across the table. There is a photo of me and Priya in matching terrible Christmas sweaters, both of us red-faced from mulled wine. There is the Excellence in Patient Outcomes plaque from the 2023 department dinner, which I almost didn't attend, which Danielle told me I absolutely had to attend, which I attended, which matters to me more than I will usually admit out loud. My student loans are paid in full. My salary is $340,000. I have a home I am about to buy, a partner who proposed in a freezer aisle, a best friend who calls every Sunday, a mentor who still texts me journal articles, a mother-in-law who makes macaroni and cheese I would drive hours for without a second thought. I think about the word burden. I have thought about it my entire life, turned it over in my hands the way you turn over something you found in the ground and cannot quite identify. A daughter who costs more than she's worth. A girl with glasses and an inhaler and a science fair ribbon nobody robbed drove to see her receive. A student who chose Duke when NC State was available. A resident who chose cardiothoracic surgery when general practice was simpler and more convenient for everyone's understanding of what she was supposed to become. I think about what it means that a hospital, a building whose entire purpose is to keep human beings alive, asked for by name, not by my family name, by mine, Celeste. I built that. Not for them, not in spite of them. For the girl who drove alone to NC State's Hunt Library at 15 years old and put the ribbon in the top drawer of her desk where no one would ask about it. For the resident eating soup from a can at 2 in the morning in a call room on Blythe Boulevard and keeping going anyway. For every woman who was told she was too expensive, too complicated, too much, and decided that the only reasonable response was to become exactly as much as she needed to be. My mother is alive because I became the person who could save her. I hold that gently, the way you hold something that is both fragile and very, very heavy. I do not need her to fully understand it. I just need to know that I do. If you see yourself in this story, in any part of it, I want to hear from you. What would you have done standing outside that oar? What would you have chosen? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this one, check the description. There is another one waiting for you there.